And we are live. Yeah, welcome to Nix Friday, everyone. Today we have Domen on the call. Domen is the creator of Cachix and also someone I know for like 3 years now, I think. We have a bit of a story together. So welcome on the stream, Domen.
Thank you.
The goal for today is just to have a conversation, for people to discover you, talk about Cachix, and other topics that we feel like we want to discuss. And then if people jump into the chat and ask some more questions, then we can also try to answer those. So I would like to start off this conversation with something I said last week, which is my origin story into Nix was basically you, the man that decided to give me the opportunity to name one of the Nix releases because I documented the lib folder, and that was really big for me at the time. And yeah, it got me super motivated. I was super happy, and so I'm just curious about how you got into Nix. Maybe you can start with that.
Sure, yeah. I actually forgot about that. It's the release thing. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Always happy to hear, when we just inspire more and more people. So, but yeah, I started with Nix Who. That was, I think, in 2013. Um, I was working back then with on a CMS actually called Plone, which is a really old, well, now really old CMS written in Python. Um, and there we had a problem that the whole CMS was like about 300 packages. There was like a package called Pillow, which was like a C wrapper about around manipulating images, and a bunch of other packages that need C code and some libraries. Um, and it was always a constant struggle between different machines and different developers. Like when we had a workshop, it took like 1 hour to set everyone up. Um, there was always someone who didn't manage to run the CMS. And we used a software called Build Out, which is like really old as well, comes from the Plum community. So actually a friend, Florian Friesdorf, discovered Nix. I don't actually even know how. He was always the guy who somehow managed to find the most obscure things. Um, and yeah, he came to us and showed us. And at that time, Nix was already out and working, but it was really bare bones, not much. I mean, just enough to install it on your machine. Um, so then we started like, oh, this is amazing, and we started like installing it and looking into how to generate Nix packages for Plone. Um, then we switched pretty quickly, actually, our development machines to NixOS. And yeah, that was kind of the start of it. I mean, there are many details to this story, but don't want to take it too long.
Oh man, 2013, that's like 7 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. And then actually Garbas, I think, was the first one to install it. Um, and then I took a little bit, I was a bit skeptical. I was like, I was a Gentoo user before.
Yeah, why do we need this?
Well, it was more like, it's actually ironic, because I had some pretty bad experience before with Gentoo. Like one time, I needed to install something when I was with a client on site in Finland, and Gentoo decided to rebuild everything and compile from scratch. So I was really like, oh man, what do I do? And it was a bit like hard because in Gentoo you can't really roll back and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah, and
so I was a bit
recompiling, it takes a full day, right, if you recompile on Gentoo.
yeah, back then the machines, the CPU wasn't as good as now as well. So in Gen 2 it took like, yeah, I think it was like about 10 hours more or less, depending if you wanted the browser as well and LibreOffice. Those were
Yeah.
the two biggest ones. Um, yeah, so it took quite a bit, and so I had this, really bad memory. So when I switched to NixOS, I was really skeptical because I was like, I don't know how this is gonna work with all of my other stuff and blah blah blah. But actually, it turns out that NixOS actually solved a lot of pain points coming from Gen 2. The one being, binary caching, in this case. So yeah, that was, it's always scary to switch technologies, I think, especially something as fundamental as an operating system.
Yeah, for sure. So is that when you got the idea of building your own binary cache, or the point?
No, that was much later. That's also a long story. Not sure. Should I tell this one now or?
Yeah,
Um,
sure. I mean, basically, so you got into Nix, and then at some point, you decided to build Cachix, which is
right.
a big step, right? Like, you had some good money flowing in, and then you decided to do this crazy thing, which is I'm gonna spend some time not earning any money to build Cachix, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, the story goes a bit back, so let me try to explain it from the beginning. Um, I was actually lucky enough to start consulting and doing Nix for Luke Goree. Yeah. He's running a small consultancy on networking called Snap, where he does like high performance networking drivers in Lua, JIT, and Assembler.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he wanted like a bit more, a bit more smarter than Docker development environment and a way to deploy stuff and blah blah blah. Um, so I did a bunch of consulting, and it was always the same pain point, like setting up Hydra and maintaining it and discovering, really bad bugs. I mean, now it's a lot better. That's all 4 years since. But back then, I don't think almost no one was running it like
Mm.
locally for themselves. And I even talked to Ilko back then, and he was like, this is more like for Nix packages only. It's not really meant to be customizable.
Yeah.
And it's still not. A lot of things are just really meant for Nix packages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I just tweeted
so
yesterday that hardware is for Nix packages. Like, it's good for that use case. But most of the time, and maybe we can get into, GitHub Actions and some of these topics later, but yeah, most of the time you just want some normal CI and run Nix builds and use some caching, right?
yeah, exactly. So I've been running Hydra, but then for even for Luke and others, they didn't want to really dig in, so I kind of ran it for them. So my first idea was, okay, let me just like set up a lot of Hydras for people. This is gonna be great. And then I started running two, and it was already like a huge mess,
Mm.
maintaining that and all of that. So I started thinking about a CI back then. Um, so then with Joe Hermakowski, I'm not sure if I can pronounce his surname correctly. Um, we started, well, actually, he did most of the work back then because I had a job, Hercules CI, or not the one that people know today,
Mm-hmm.
but the open source version, which was actually supposed to be at first just the front end for Hydra, but then we quickly discovered like we need to rewrite the whole backend as well, at least the querying part, so that everything can be like a nice JSON API or something. And then the schema would still be, Hydra schema, so anyone could like plug it in. So Joe did a lot of work, and actually it was quite far. But at that point already, there were a lot of issues. One was just that I think Joe and me were both burnt out from open source, like doing job and then doing open source in the afternoon, and just doing this from mere excitement and kind of this big wish to remove this huge pain from Nix development.
Yeah.
And then I think we both, I really had less and less energy, and Joe, I think, switched jobs at that time. So basically, the project was kind of like just that for months.
And that was named Hercules, yeah, as well, right?
Yeah, that was named Hercules, yeah,
Yeah.
because Hercules, because of the Greek mythology, Hercules kills Hydra. Um,
Right.
and, and so, yeah, and then that was kind of it. And then I think this was 2000 and, I don't know, 17 or 18. I'm not even sure exactly. I think 17. Um, yeah, and then a lot of time passed. And then I started working for IOHK, where I led the DevOps team, where we used Nix quite extensively to deploy, a huge cryptocurrency and package like the desktop client in Nix and the backend servers were Nix. Everything was running Nix, which was a lot of work actually at that time. Um, and the same problem reappeared, right? We had to maintain Hydra, and there it was even worse because there were many developers, I think maybe over 50 back then,
Hmm.
and they all hated Nix, but they all actually hated Nix because of Hydra, because every time something would fail, they would go to Hydra and they would get lost and they had no idea what's going on and so on. Um, and it was really a huge problem just selling Nix internally because of Hydra
Hmm.
experience. And actually, the major thing that people, really got was Hydra, right? That was their kind of facing Nix face or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
Hydra is
yeah,
actually quite powerful, but the navigation sucks, right? Like.
yeah, the navigation doesn't have like breadcrumbs.
Hmm.
So as soon as you go, well, it kind of has, but it's hidden in the menu, and most people don't even notice that.
Hmm.
You have to go into the menu, and then from there you have the breadcrumbs. Um, yeah, and a lot of things, but mostly it's user friendliness is really the last thing that was ever considered when designing Hydra. It was more about just making things work. Um,
Yeah, and it's still
so
very
yeah,
much the case, right? Like, I think
right.
because Nix packages is getting so many pull requests, the main job right now is just to keep the Postgres database alive, and the Hydra evaluator is taking 32 gigs of RAM, and like that's where most of the work comes in, is actually. And by the way, shout out to Graham, who did a lot of work in the background. Like, people don't really realize, but he's actually has been upgrading the Postgres database like 3-4 times already, updating the schemas, adding more indexes, and yeah,
Nice.
it's a lot of work. But then yeah, like you have this, and I don't remember how big the database is right now, but you don't do big refactors when you have that much data around. Like, it's yeah.
Yeah, like completely changing the schema is a lot of work, especially if you want things moving. I
Yeah.
mean, there's basically whole teams of people in GitHub and around to do this job, right? So, yeah. Um, so yeah, then there's very little effort left for generalizing it.
Oh,
Um,
I there's also some comments on the chat I just realized,
mhm.
and I think Adis makes a good point. Hydra is also not really well suited for PR-based workflows.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, that's actually the main, interface to developers is the pull request on GitHub. You can set it up, I think, through declarative job sets. Um, I don't really remember that part. It's been years since I've done that. But there is ways, no, actually, yeah, there's a status plugin that it will post status. But the way it works is really confusing because it kind of tries to hack around the current Hydra model.
Yeah,
Um,
because Hydra pulls from master or like the configured branch regularly, so it's not really designed
yeah,
to dynamically add new targets basically in the system.
exactly, yeah. So I mean, the long story short, that's really bad experience for
Right.
developers.
Hydra is wrong. We have to rebuild something.
Exactly, yeah. So then I left IOHK. This was, I think, beginning of 2018. Yeah, yeah. Um, and then I started thinking a lot about, how to make Nix great and what to go forward. And the more I was thinking about it, the more I came to conclusion that, I need some resources to pull this off, and consulting is not really working well because it just leads to burnout if you kind of do your job during the day and open source stuff during the afternoon.
Yeah.
Um, so I started thinking a lot about what to do. So I made two decisions. One was to really think about the MVP needed for a CI, and I discovered that, actually, the binary cache with an existing CI is essentially, very good um, solution, and you don't need the whole scheduling. Actually, you can hijack, back then it was Travis, now it's GitHub Actions.
Mhm.
Um, so I was really happy about that because I knew I could build binary cache, not as much effort as CI. Um, and yeah, then I made another decision, which was to make it sustainable. And the more I thought about it, the more it was clear that businesses and people, individuals as well, if they want to, have to somehow pay for the service. Otherwise, there's no.
Right.
Um,
Domen, why is Cachix not open source?
right. Yeah. So I'm getting kind of to this answer.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I discovered, I need to earn money. Unfortunately, we all need that in this world. And I started thinking about, I started actually researching open source models first. There's a couple of really good resources, a couple of books, a couple of research.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, basically the major two business models are Red Hat, which is the support model. So, like charge people for the support. That model is basically that nobody likes to pay for the support. There's just really huge companies that pay, Red Hat because they want, really old legacy.
Hmm.
So that doesn't really apply to Nix. The other option is what, for example, HashiCorp is doing, which is kind of like this open core model where you make everything open source and then you just keep the enterprise features kind of private. But I did research in Nix world, and there's like maybe one or two companies that would really require such a thing.
Yeah.
And even then, they're not really obliged to use it, right? It's their choice. So if I make it open source and give it to everyone, then um, I would only have a couple of companies who would be willing to pay for my time and effort. So that's the long answer. The short answer is just that, I need to make money.
Yeah. I mean,
Everything I
this
did
is
in the last
this
12
is
years of my career has been mostly open source. But things need to create value and money.
for sure. I mean, it's tricky and it's hard to go back from open source, right? Like, once you made it open source, then it's hard to say to people, no, actually, now I'm taking the code back, or like, I'm stopping to publish to the open source.
Yeah, that's always like, the truth is that a lot of developers are really well skilled. So if you offer them a really nice documentation and everything, then for sure they will host it themselves. And at this point, there's just no way to make it. If Nix would have like 1 million users, then I would happily adopt, for example, a HashiCorp model and only charge big companies and offer it for free.
Yeah.
But we're nowhere near that. And we can talk about how to get there actually, maybe later. Not
Yeah,
to
sounds
mix
good.
too many topics.
Just to finish on the topic, I mean, it's always a bit of a conversation, but there's no right answer, I think. Uh, Iron Rock is asking if you're aware of sponsorware, which is a
Yeah,
project on GitHub.
yeah, I know about that. I mean, I briefly saw it in a tweet someday. Do I understand correctly that that means you kind of, it's like GitHub sponsors essentially. Like it's open
Oh.
source, but then people pay you for like support and tiers basically.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, well, we can quickly check. So I don't say things that are not true.
He says it gives access only to people paying you, and once you are making enough money, you open source it to everybody.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know about that bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly didn't exist back then. It's an interesting concept. I don't also, I wouldn't choose this as well right now because the vision and the things I want to build require way more resources than just one person.
Mm-hmm.
So once Cachix starts covering my salary, any further resources will go into making more things for Nix.
Which
And
you
we
already
can,
do, right? Like, I seen you did already tons of work. I mean, we can go into that later if you want.
yeah, already this model has allowed me to spend quite a bit on really important things in my view, which is like the installer documentation and so on. But yeah, we can go into that topic. But just to close off on the why not open source. Yeah, this is probably could be its own talk, just discussing this. Of course, there's trade-offs. Like always, in general, infrastructure you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
We see that with Amazon, we see that with GitHub and so on. GitHub is able to commoditize this because it has so many million users.
Mm-hmm.
And Cachix could be the same. I mean, my dream is that one day it could be just like Dropbox, where you pay very little for terabytes of storage. But right now, with the community size, I rely on businesses, who are willing to pay for Cachix so that I get basically my time back, and they get really good support for Nix and a bunch of features that Cachix offers.
Yeah. I mean, we are having regular conversations, and so like running a business is not the same as just writing some code. Like there's a bunch of other stuff that goes in, and it's difficult actually to be a good businessman and a good developer and a designer and all of the, when you do a company on your own, you're basically doing everything. So yeah, it's
That
pretty
sounds.
crazy.
It's actually like a lot of work. All the rest of it, like open source, is much different. You just focus on the code and maybe a bit on the docs. But in business, it's much different.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, so now we have Cachix. Should we go a bit into how it's working under the hood and how maybe it's different than just a S3 binary cache and things like that?
Right. Oh yeah, sure. Should I just start?
Yeah,
Or
go
do you
for it.
have? All right. Yeah, I mean, it's the backend server is written in Haskell just as the client, and then it interfaces storage, and in front of all of that, there's a CDN which kind of does all the caching and allows allows the fact that Cachix doesn't charge for the bandwidth. So if you would use an S3 or any other store, usually most of the cost comes from the bandwidth, and that's not immediately clear, especially if you're doing like a lot of CI builds in the cloud or just having huge closures.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean that's very high level infrastructure. It runs on Amazon. That's something I can say. The CDN is Cloudflare, and uh, yeah, it has like a JSON HTTP API. The front end is written in Elm, and there's like a bridge between the backend and front end that allows me to iterate a bit faster. Um, yeah, and then there's a lot of details to it, probably. Maybe some of the interesting things I can explain is, for example, most people use Nix copy to upload if they're using an existing binary cache like an S3.
Mm-hmm.
Cachix push will actually perform much faster for a couple of reasons. One is that Nix copy will upload the closure in the order of dependencies. This is because on S3 you don't want to upload something without having a dependency on S3 before. So if somebody would request that path, then the dependency would be missing at that time. NX doesn't really handle that case really well. So the problem with that approach is, of course, it's correct, the most correct approach, but it's not really the fastest. So if you have like just a really shallow tree where something depends on another thing, there's basically not going to be any parallelism when
Mm.
uploading. Like Nix copy will always wait for the previous thing to finish, which is actually quite common. Not that extreme that there's just one, but there's usually just a couple. So if you want to upload like 8 things in parallel, like Cachix does, it won't even scale that well. That's one reason. The other one is that Cachix push will first query with just one request for all the paths, where Nix copy will, go each, it for each Nix store path, it will have to request it exists on that binary cache.
Mm.
So if you have, let's say, 2,000 things to upload, it's going to be 2,000 requests, which is not really that much. I mean, probably that can be done in, let's say, a couple of seconds or maybe like 10 seconds, but it's still, overhead you have to pay
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, so do you mind talking a bit about how much traffic you're serving right now?
Mm, yeah, sure. Well, I can check, so I don't check that too often.
I'm just
Um,
curious about, how many gigabytes you push and pull every day.
I don't have that precise statistics. I could generate those. Um, but I think per month, let's quickly check the exact numbers. Yeah, per month right now, it's about 8 terabytes of downloaded
Nice.
traffic. And now the uploaded one, it's really hard to say because of garbage collection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it fluctuates. Um, but yeah, not that much actually. Most of the work that a Cachix does is actually downloads, and there's pretty big difference in upload versus down. I mean, that's kind of the point of the cache, right? You don't want to
Yeah.
just upload the stuff. You want to download it as much time as possible. So I think that's a good sign that Cachix is providing its value. Um, that people are re-downloading the same stuff so often. Um,
Yeah.
Actually, it would be interesting to provide the upload per month versus download so people could get a bit more insight into that really, that the cache is useful, because if it would be one-to-one, then it's questionable, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it depends also, like, if people update Nix packages updates or not. I've seen in a lot of places they pin Nix packages and then they don't touch it anymore until they really need it. So all
Yeah,
these closures, system closures, are just gonna be the same for a really long time.
right. Yeah, it always depends on the project. If you just have like a simple Nix shell on top of Nix packages, then it's going to be, just a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that case, you can, use Cachix for free, and, setting up an a separate binary cache with like an S3 would, in my opinion, be just not really feasible given that, Cachix has 10 gigabytes of free, and that's actually a lot. I have to put up some statistics on the webpage, because this is compressed data, excluding what's in Nix packages, upstream cache. So it's quite a lot of data that you
Yeah.
can put for free.
Yeah, you need to figure out how much you can give out for free, so you're still profitable, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this was a bit arbitrary, but it works well so far. So.
Right, you need to start somewhere.
Exactly, yeah.
Aryan Rock is asking if you're willing to go into SLAs in the future.
SLAs, right. Yeah, well, this is more of a question of, I think the service itself, I think it probably makes sense to set up an SLA at some point. If you were talking about like a self-hosted enterprise edition, then that's a different topic that we can also cover.
Yeah, I know. I think SLA means like guarantees that you provide for uptime, something like that. And usually,
yeah, so
there's some
the question
monetary.
is that for the cloud version or for like a self-hosted version?
Right. Right. So I don't know. We're gonna wait on Aryan to reply. Because yeah, we didn't mention, but you basically have the self-serving SaaS version, and then people can contact you, and then you also deploy Cachix into companies that have maybe more strict regulatory requirements and things like that.
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible, although for now there's not been too much interest. And also, something to be really clear upfront is that, if you want a self-hosted version, then it's obviously quite a bit more expensive than the cloud version, because in the cloud version, the overhead of maintenance for me is the same for all the users, where, a self-hosted one with the support means, a consulting-like relationship with a partner. So that of course doesn't come at a free cost. But at this point, I do offer this if somebody's interested.
Okay, so listeners, if you're interested, you should shoot an email to domen@cachix.org, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. One example is when people have self-hosted storage and they run out of storage space. That's really interesting one, because garbage collecting stuff without having that in the database is really, basically impossible. The algorithm is quite harsh. There's a couple of bugs in Nix, like Nix will cache nar infos for 30 days. So you can delete the nar info, but you cannot delete the nar unless you know that it hasn't been accessed in the 30 days. So if you don't have that statistic, you basically cannot delete any nar, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, something.
And also, it's I think it assumes if you can reach, like if you have a tree of dependencies, it's assuming that if the top of the tree is available, then all of the rest is available, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And typically, when you garbage collect, you don't necessarily know. I mean, in S3, for example, you just set like the lifetime of an object. So if you set it to 30 days, it doesn't really know the relationship between that object or another object, and so it would just create like these incomplete trees that you basically Nix is gonna fail if you try to get that.
Yeah, and actually it's even worse. Nix will loop in some cases. If you have two actually Robert figured this out just a couple of days, but I found a bug with one of my customers. If you have two outputs, it will fetch the first one, then it will say, oh, you need that derivation for the other one, and then it will try to build the other one that it's missing, and then it goes basically back, so it will just jump between the two outputs and loop. Of course, this can be fixed in Nix, but if you garbage collect, suddenly your machines will just loop and stuff. So it's really tricky to get right at the moment. Of course, with a lot of work on the Nix side, this could be a lot better. But still the caching of NAR infos for 30 days without having a last access data, it's really hard to do much
Hmm.
about NARs, which is actually where most of the storage is. I mean, NAR infos are, very short. So Cachix does basically garbage collection first on lists recently used. So every time anyone go access a NAR, that's going to get recorded. Um, and then it will fall back to creation date. So if you don't have enough accesses across your entries, it will then just start deleting stuff that was created um, as the oldest entry in the cache, which is actually works pretty well. I kind of plan to come up with a good statistic to help people determine like the balance between the storage size, because one interesting question that everybody asks then is, okay, but can I know if there was a pad that was garbage collected, and then I've requested it so that I would have saved time if I didn't garbage collect, right? I
Hmm.
think that's an interesting question that I would like to answer in the future.
Right.
And then the whole garbage collection really serves its full purpose, I think.
Do you ever have people that want to, like, if they do a release, maybe they want to keep that version in the cache much longer than maybe just the dev branches and things like that?
Yeah, but there's been a couple of people who contacted me about that, but I say, I mean, if you have releases, then it is very likely that somebody's going to access that. I mean, given that it's a release, you would expect that to be accessed, so the garbage collection should actually work in your favor here
No, I see.
and we push that, access time up. Um, so I think in practice, those things should really help, unless you push like crazy amounts of data to Cachix, right? And you have to pre-plan, then in that case you would be in trouble.
Hmm.
Um, but I plan to add some ways to pin stuff, so that you can be like absolutely sure um, that it's in the cache. I think for releases, for example, it makes a lot of sense to have this complete, trust. But in practice, I would really say that the the algorithm was chosen so that exactly this use case works really well in favor of the user.
Hmm. Yeah, I think potentially you might want to keep the sources around, like, if you're pulling from third parties, it would be nice if you could make this distinction and keep those around. I'm not sure how feasible that is, but yeah.
Um, you mean the sources that were required to build that, or?
Right, like sometimes you pull the source code from a library that you need for the project, and that library lives. The most egregious ones are usually some FTP website from a university,
Yeah.
and this tends to disappear. And then if like 5 years later you want to make a patch release from this version, then you have to rebuild, and then you're missing the source, and now you have to go hunt on the internet where is the copy of the source. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is actually where the IPFS project is interesting to cover all those sources and mirror them. I mean, there's the software heritage project for that.
Mm-hmm.
If I were a team or anyone, well, a company ideally, I mean, most of the time, but someone who really cares about this stuff, so that it really doesn't disappear from internet. Every time I would see an FTP or something, I would mirror it myself by default.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably not really a good answer for in terms of automation.
So it would be
Um,
a different service basically, like.
yeah,
Yeah.
but in general, I don't see that really that common. Really, most people will download stuff from package manager indexes or GitHub. Um, But yeah, that's one edge case where mirroring the internet is really important.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Cachix should really solve that. I mean, there could be like a script that will push to Cachix all the sources. I mean, there is one actually in Nix packages, and you can just push to Cachix if you want to preserve that. And then again, if your CI will download these things, it will just keep up the last access date around.
I guess the name is like the answer is in the name. It's not called Store Forever X, it's called Cachix. And so
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's difficult. Like people want more features, and you need to decide what's important or not.
Yeah, it's and you know, when you build something for the business, it's often that you need to like forget about the toys for a bit, and focus on what people actually need, which is I think good because that aligns with my mission, which is to bring Nix to, you know, really en masse. And I think we need to listen more to what people need, rather than just keep building toys. And not to say that toys are not great. Just the thing that will really grow, I think, Nix use will be when we build, you know, reliable infrastructure, and other things around like documentation. So those are the things I want to focus on.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. So that kind of opens the question, you know, like, I mean, today Cachix is, I think you did a good job on like providing a cache. It's free for most use cases, which is awesome. Like you can use it on GitHub. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about the other things that you did already. And then we can talk about what is it that you plan to do for the future and things like that.
All right, sure.
And I would like to start with, actually, I want to thank you for the installed Nix action, which I've been using a lot and has really transformed this, like GitHub actions with install Nix action, and then obviously the Cachix action is such a great combo that, like, yeah, it's just great to use. And so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad that's, you know, people are using it actually quite a lot. I think I saw there's like almost 1,000 repos now if you search through GitHub or something. So yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of work there to be done, or potential work. I mean, and thank you for your contributions. You actually, I think, contributed quite a few things to it. And now we probably share now the changes or something. I don't know, we'll have to check. But yeah, there's a lot of improvements. I need to make. So basically now when you install Cachix, it fetches Nix packages. So that takes a while. I want to speed it up so that it's more. So at least for Linux and macOS and things like that, it will just, you know, provide a hash that you can then just substitute instead of going through the source and evaluating and all of that stuff. And then only for like obscure platforms, you really need to do that. So I think that's going to really speed it up. And I think then it's already quite fast. The install Nix action takes like about 5 seconds on Linux and maybe about 7 or 8 on macOS. And the Cachix one should then take, well, just a second or maybe 2 to download and provide the hash and then download the Cachix closure. So yeah, maybe a couple of more to download the Cachix closure, so like 3 or 5. So yeah, there should be about 10 seconds of overhead for each build, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah, it's decent. It's, I mean, from my experience, like right now, if you just use the stock one, it takes 30 seconds. Then with a bit of optimization, you can get it down to 17 seconds. But then if you need to rebuild any Nix code under that initial phase, it usually takes a bunch more time because you need to fetch all of the stuff from the binary cache every time when you build, and so
Yeah.
like it's nice for the no up case where everything is already in the cache, and then like you just rebased maybe, and like you just updated the readme and then it doesn't rebuild anything, and so you get like this nice 1 minute CI, and we can probably bring it down to 30 seconds, but then after that, the values start to be a bit diminishing. Like,
Yeah, of the optimization. But I still think there is a couple. So like there is the Nix build uncached, or yeah, I think that's the name. I think that I just talked to John Erickson actually today, and he has an idea how to implement that in Nix.
nice.
He told me when I was chatting with him. So that's pretty cool, I think, because usually you don't want to download everything. You just want to make sure that everything is in the binary cache. So actually his idea is pretty clever. It's basically to say that you have that the binary cache is the store, so it won't go and build and put it into the binary cache. I mean, you kind of would need a layered store probably, so that it will like put it in the local and another store. But I mean, there are details to be figured out. That's one thing. And that would save a lot of downloads. And the other thing is, I think it's also an open issue, is to be able to specify way more substitutors in parallel. Right now, when you pass the max jobs parameter to Nix, that describes the cores used for the builds and also the substitutors, which I think is not really the correct way, because the substitutors are all about the networking, boundaries, and the builds are usually about the CPU boundaries.
Okay, so just to rephrase what you're saying is, if you have 4 CPUs by default, Nix will do 4 builds at the same time in parallel, but also it will only fetch 4 things at the same time, and actually it could probably fetch more if the network is pretty good, right? Like this.
Yeah. It could be way more, I think, like 8 or even higher could be a sane default. I mean, nowadays, I would optimize for, the Pareto rule, which is like that 80% of our users will have a pretty decent networking. And downloading a lot of things in parallel would really speed it up. And even like in the GitHub action, I would just like to set it much higher, because, it's a GitHub network, it's really fast. If you integrate with Cachix, it should really download fast. But if I set it to really high, then the problem is it's going to start a lot of builds on the 2-core machine that GitHub provides. So there is really no way for me to tweak this right now. So I think that just that one setting would really really speed up also the waiting time for the binary caches.
Nice.
For a lot of people. And then the question is, what is a good default for this? But yeah. let's leave that for another day.
Yeah, Nix hasn't been released for a long time now. There's so many good things coming up for the next release.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of really good things. I'm mostly excited about the UX improvements, and there's been really a lot.
And you contributed to one of these improvements, right? Not directly, but you sponsored some work to redo the error messaging, which hasn't been released yet.
That was a project we did with Ben Brudat. I'm not sure if that's the correct way to spell his surname. And he's been really amazing. He has done really hard work on formatting and showing the source code in the error messages and stuff like that, and providing a bit more frameworky approach to how their the error messages are formatted. We also both spent quite some time just looking through issues and improving the error messages themselves. So for example, now in the Nix 3 release, there is no more infinite recursion at undefined position error message.
Yeah, that's
so
huge.
So that memo is gone. Actually, there's quite a few places where we've inserted the position, and there's quite a few places still missing. So that would be one milestone just to really get the position of the error really in our error messages. And then a lot of error messages, I think, would benefit from extra information. So we will try to do a bit more crowdfunding on this campaign and really push this further. Um, and actually, you can still donate to, if you go to Open Collective Nix error messages, you can still donate and give a bunch of issues to Ben, and he'll try to tackle those. It's a bit tricky to really say if you donate $5, if he'll be able to spend like 4 hours on an error message. So it's best to talk to
Right.
us, but at least
So
looking at those
for
would be
people that
beneficial.
are listening, because I think some people might be podcasting this, to find the link, they have to go to opencollective.org/nix-error-messages or something like that.
No, it's Nix dash errors dash enhancement. Yeah.
And opencollective.com actually.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Or just mention me or you on Twitter, and then we can find the link.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we did, but there is a lot of more improvements. Like Elko did a lot of the new CLI work. I mean, there's flakes, which are, I think, also a huge UX improvement.
Right.
And there are just things like, oh, there is now the doc command, which will display documentation for each built-in function. There's a lot of really weird errors that were fixed. Yeah, so it's really huge release, and I really hope it comes out soon.
Yeah, I think at some point we need to say, yeah, it's ready, and just cut the release. We'll see.
Yeah, hopefully Elko does that soon.
We had a viewer previously that said something along the lines, please teach flakes. I think
What?
someone
Is it
said,
what?
please teach some Nix flakes, please.
Oh, for us.
Yeah. Not on
Yeah,
this stream, but maybe like in a future one.
exactly.
Cool. So, what is did we miss? Yeah, you did Nix.dev, which is great. Nix.dev, it's a collection of just guides and practical tutorials of how to get things set up. Obviously with Cachix in the mix, but also other things. And
Yeah, I plan to go back into writing a bunch of more tutorials in September. I want to cover really common tutorials like, setting up NixOS on Raspberry Pi, deploying NixOS with like Terraform, and NixOps maybe. I don't know. I'll see about adding that as well. And just a few really common tutorials that people struggle to find, and like more a bit on real world examples of packaging like a web app and things like that.
sounds good.
So yeah.
And then you do so Nixos weekly, which is probably taking some of your time as well.
Yeah, it's more like a monthly now. I found out its monthly schedule is actually really good, because there's just enough content that it makes it like a nicely packed resource in a month. Yeah, that takes some time, but I also have plans for that to like, right now it's a very bare bones project with just like a few links and then a short description. But we're slowly getting to the point where there is enough content to spend a bit more time, curating that list. So yeah, that's also something I would say that's the best way to be up to date with a community right now if you don't want to spend like hours digging through, all the different communication channels and you just want like a weekly summary. And a lot of people actually find that interesting. A lot of times people answer it. I mean, not a lot of times, but quite often people will answer like, "Oh, thanks. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about this. It's really cool." So,
nice.
not everyone has the luxury to hang around like we do. So I think it's
Yeah.
good to be mindful of that.
Synchro, we're both drinking at the same time. All right, you want to talk about the future or what's on your plate? What are you up to now?
Yeah. There's a bunch of things. I'm gonna add. Currently, when you use Cachix, you kind of control the signing key, which is the same way as you do on S3 and other binary caches. I want to provide abstraction on top of that, so that Cachix kind of, is basically an authentication service. Because right now it happened a few times that people lost or leaked the signing key, and I basically cannot do anything except delete the cache. Or I mean, you can delete the cache yourself as a user. Well, one way would be to re-sign all those packages with a different signing key. But then if you licked it, it's also a problem like of was it really you or not? So what I'm gonna do is that Cachix will be the trustee of the signing key, and people will just use authentication tokens to prove to Cachix that they have either read or write access. And that's gonna open up a bunch of really cool stuff that you'll be able to generate tokens per cache and things like that. So that's one huge thing. The other one is I want to focus some part of my weeks just to, Nix documentation. I've been really talking to a lot of Nix users because of Cachix. There's like almost 2,000 users on Cachix right now. And the message from people is really clear. It's documentation. It's, people want to do something with Nix and then they get stuck and then they lose hours of figuring out what the hell happened or what they should do. And it's pretty clear that the major drawback to mass adoption right now is really poor documentation. And there are many parts to this that I can maybe explain a bit, but that's one huge thing. And with limited resources, there's only much I can do. So I'll focus on really the reference and the tutorials and stuff like that, like how to get started essentially. And then there's a bunch of things on Cachix that are not too interesting, like support for organizations so that it fits better to companies and things like that.
Yeah. Which reminds me, thanks for sponsoring the Nix community cache.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that has the biggest sponsorship, 1 terabyte of storage.
Yeah, this is huge. So now we had Ryan TM on the stream and he's doing the updater bot, right? And so the updater bot is pushing to the same cache as the Nix community, and then we have all the Emacs. There's a Emacs package overlay that's also being built. Then we have a Hydra also set up for the Nix community. All of this all goes to the same cache, so as a user you can, if you trust Nix community, which is a separate organization than the NixOS one, then you get access to all of these things. And I think newer packages as well. So like it's starting to be like a second big cache basically that you can benefit from, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting approach because Nix packages is more for releases of software where, this is more for like development of Nix software.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's really interesting. I think you've started the Nix community, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I thought at the time, I mean, the Nix organization is starting to become better organized. But at the time, I felt we needed a separate organization that can hold experiments, be a bit more loose on who has access to what, and it's still very much the case. Like you can have your own projects in the community, and the ownership is shared as well. So if someone leaves, we can still give the ownership to another person. Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
informal, but yeah, everyone is welcome to join if they want to participate.
yeah, I think that's actually a quite good model. When I was doing Plone just before Nix, it had the same model. So the Plone organization itself was really for core contributors, where you had to like physically sign some agreement,
Hmm.
because yeah, there was a foundation behind it, and then there was a community then organization where like all the add-ons and all kinds of stuff was there, and I think that in the Nix case that's pretty good. But I mean, there's then a question if we should have a mono repo for all the experiments or not. But yeah, that's for a different day.
Yeah, let's not go into this. There's a user called JKFSDA that says we should check the github.com/mlvzk/manix, which is a CLI tool for finding documentation.
Mhm. Okay, I'll check it out after the talk. Not want to waste everyone's time now. Um, And
It's it's for specifically to search into Nix packages and Nexus options and a bunch of other stuff. Looks really great. Thanks for the link.
yeah, I don't know about the
So
future. Is
yeah, I
there
don't
much
know.
to say? Not sure. I think that's. I mean, I have lots of ideas, but I don't want to share them before I do them. I found it hard to talk about these things before they're done. So
Yeah, and the future is uncertain. We don't know what's gonna happen.
yeah, so don't wanna you know uh, blog too much about that.
Yeah. All right. So maybe should do you want to wrap up, or is there other things you wanted to talk about that we missed?
Um, I don't know. One thing maybe to discuss is how to really bring Nix to really mainstream audience. Actually, I submitted a talk for NixCon about this, so I hope it's accepted. I'll spend way more time than for this to dive into well my ideas. Um, but I really think that we have the technology and solutions to real problems right now in DevOps, and that what's holding us back is not so much the design issues themselves, but we as a community are holding ourselves back a bit for with different things. Um, but yeah, that's something I really care about, and this is why I started Cachix and all of that in the first place. So I think that's really the gist of it.
Hmm.
Um, so one part is just that Nix is trying to be a really, really general tool for distributing software, and that's causing a lot of pain on the user experience side. Nix is like just like GPG, where it's this like Swiss Army knife with everything, but then you ask people Do you know how to encrypt and decrypt the GPG? And nobody knows from the top of their head. Um, so I feel they're very similar projects. And another analogy I can think of is that, Nix is like the JavaScript of DevOps, as terrible as that sounds. Um, and then I said that because, there is like the JavaScript, the good parts book. And I kind of think we need that for Nix. And this is why I started the anti-patterns on Nix.dev as well,
Mm.
teaching about what to avoid. Um, so, we just basically keep adding on stuff since the beginning of Nix. There was not much removed. I think manifests were removed and a couple of other things, but not that much.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so I think
it's also because we want backward compatibility, right?
yeah, of course, there's always the line between that, but I think at some point it's also good to, I mean, like Nix CLI, right? The
Mm.
new CLI, it's also good to start fresh. And it's always hard to support like two interfaces like we will now, or I mean, Elko will mostly. But these are the necessary steps.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, for example, personally, that the multi-user, viability in Nix is causing a lot of headache for not as much gain.
Mm.
And I mean, just for example, if you open up nix.conf options, you have no idea whether these apply to the daemon or the client. And then explaining that to a user, it's weird. Like you basically have to try it out. So, you're driving the user through a lot of pain before they even know what they can do. The ideal scenario would obviously be that they open up documentation and they know exactly how to achieve the thing they want.
Mm.
Um, and there's a lot of bugs on this topic as well. Like if you garbage collect as a user, it behaves not the way you would really expect it to behave. Um, so the whole distinction between like the root user and other users is really vague in my opinion. Um, but I also see the value in that feature. I just think that it would solve the problems, including the installation bit, if it was removed, for example.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, for the Next.js use case, I think you still want a system level Next daemon, right?
yeah, I mean, daemon is
Or
a
would you
different topic.
run everything as root?
Yeah, the daemon is a different topic. I don't think that you really need to remove the daemon. It's just the fact that different users can install software, right? I mean, in typical setting, only in all basically package managers, only the root can do that, right? And then there is some way to like go into the sudo or root or system administrator. Um, and then in Nix, because it needs to track all of that and permissions, this Boolean, are you a trusted user or not, basically spans whole Nix software,
Mm.
and it brings a lot of complexity into almost every decision. Including like, should you trust this binary cache or not, and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so every piece of Nix has to deal with this Boolean question of, is the user trusted or is it not? Which I think makes it really complex.
Yeah. I don't
Um,
know what's the right answer though, because yeah, I think you still want per user configuration or Nix, but I agree that, I mean, ideally, each user would have their own Nix store, and then you wouldn't have to trust the user on that, right? Because then it
yeah,
would be just, if each user had their own little namespace where they could pull the whatever they want into the namespace, then that would be fine, I think. And then you would not have to make the distinction between the user or the system.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go. If you have multiple stores, there's like other problems to solve. Um, but it's also in general the question if you really need that. I think if you target like servers and DevOps, like developer machines and DevOps, then you don't really need a multi-user in most cases.
Right.
I mean, now, of course, somebody's gonna bring up an edge use case.
What? You don't have
But
a mainframe where all the users SSH into and
yeah, that gets tricky, right?
yeah.
Maybe there could be like a separate version of Nix or something we could do differently that we would allow, we would separate this from the really core of Nix.
Mm.
Um,
But
but
you're
I
right
think this is
in the
creating a
sense
lot
that,
of problems.
yeah, you're right, that is something that has to be rethought. The solution is not super obvious to me. Iron Rock is saying that content address store will solve all of these issues. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe.
So yeah, I think it has to do bringing Nix to really mainstream. I mean, I think another great way to think about it is Docker versus Linux containers, right? I mean, Docker is essentially not much more than Linux containers. It does provide a way to build a container, right? That's kind of like the main feature. Um, but it was really popular, and the containers were around there for a long time actually before Docker, and only Docker was the one who really brought it to en masse. So I think this interface and use of visibility is something we'll have to rethink. Um, and actually, stuff like bringing IPFS on top of Nix, I think goes in the opposite direction. But maybe for a good reason. I don't know. I don't know enough to really judge that. I'm just
Right.
a bit skeptical in that sense.
Yeah, IPFS are sort of the
Its
capability
own
side of
beast.
things, and then what you want is a simpler front end to mix, which I mean, Docker basically was a simple front end to containers, right? That was
Yeah,
the key.
exactly.
Like, and it wasn't like great. Like, you would still have to spend some time to understand what it was able to do, but it was still in the realm of, you know, actually, I think it was just, it's just complicated enough that you think that you can figure it out with enough time, but then there was still a bunch of unknowns that you had to figure out afterwards, like volume mounting, especially when you're on macOS, then you had issues with user permissions and
Right.
the Docker file. Yeah, I don't want to go too much into that, but it was like,
Yeah.
it gave you the impression that like you installed, it gave you like this quick hit of dopamine where you installed it and 10 minutes later you have a container running and you're like, oh, that's awesome, I can now sandbox my build environments. And yeah, that was pretty good at that, I think.
Yeah, and I think Nix has actually similar problems as Docker right now. I mean, we have to be honest and say that it's much harder to use, and there's so many things going on. And just thinking about those and simplifying them, I think would go a very long way.
Well, you don't have the same install experience yet. It's not
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah, just the installer is a huge difference. Yeah.
if I had less of money, I would actually just rework the installer completely. But I don't have the time right now.
Yeah, that's my that was my conclusion when I started Cachix, is that all of these projects take a significant amount of resources. Um, and I think, it's really hard to coordinate everyone on an open source project this way, and say, okay, let's build all together. Usually it's one person who does most of the work for a feature, and then that's merged in, right? But projects like this take quite a lot of effort and convincing to others that this is a good idea and so on. So it's easier to pull off if it's just sponsored in, can be even with donations or whatever. But yeah, I agree. The installer is definitely a problem because people who install software which is supposed to manage, which is supposed to be a package manager, and then the installer fails, they will go like, okay, that's kind of its own job. So if this doesn't work, then
Right, the confidence. And there's no uninstall script, so if you just want to try Nix, then you're kind of stuck with like a bunch of files in your system, bunch of users.
Yeah, and you see already here that the multi-user has separated the installer in the first place, right? So you can see this split brain situation, going all around Nix, including the installer and so on. And I think a lot of effort could be spared if there was just one path. And then even with the support, you always have to ask, oh, how did you install it? And because there's so many options, you just constantly have to go around these questions and then have the context of how it really differs and so on. And I think that makes it really hard, even for experienced users. So I think that's a big, I mean, it's also really, tied into Nix. So really, cutting that off, I don't know how easy it is. I mean, for sure not easy, but how, feasible it is. So I think that's one of the big topics.
I don't know.
Yeah, anyway.
It would be nice if you had like I was just thinking about bootstrapping Nix with Nix. Like you would have a bash implementation of Nix, like a minimal version that can install Nix. And then, yeah.
Yeah,
It's not realistic.
you would need to ship like a Nix OS or something to manage the services then also across OS and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, it would reinstall your machine on Nixos if you install Nix.
Okay.
That would solve all of your issues.
And that's another topic actually. Like, we really recommend to a lot of people, like they go and how do I start with Nix? And I think most of suggestions are usually what people did, but they're not necessarily the best way. And I really think that the best way to go about this is to start with a Nix shell. Actually, you said this yourself in a NixCon like 2017, that the best way to sneak Nix into project is through Nix shell. So development environments, and this is why Nix.dev covers that extensively. And then the other part is deploying NixOS in the cloud. I mean, nowadays most people will do that. And actually, there is not such a great tutorial. I mean, you can use NixOps, but then that's tricky on its own for reasons. Don't want to go into them right now, but I think your Terraform project, for example, would really go a long way of just playing with Nix, deploying it on Amazon really nicely. People are very familiar with Terraform nowadays. So yeah, those are kind of the things that I think the pragmatist would really like to see the first time they try Nix. Because most people algorithm of trying things is like, well, I will fool around for 4 hours and then I have to go back to my life. And I think that's kind of like something we are not really able to pull off right now with the resources. It's more like read the whole manual and then slowly you'll get it, which is.
But I'm confident we'll get there. I think.
No, I agree. I think
improvements. I've been working on a Nix shell replacement. Well, more like I wrote packages.mk shell a long time ago in Nix packages, right? And so right now I'm playing with making a new version that's called mk dev shell, which is aimed at exactly that use case where you just want to have like you have a normal project and you want to pull more dependencies, and then you just want to have that Nix shell experience, and that's it. And you just need it to be fast and reliable, and that other people that don't know Nix can use it. Yeah, I'm just playing around.
I think that's really cool. Yeah, I think the development environment for sure, probably the most common way that people could get in touch of Nix. And of course then it's the installation, right? Those two combined are like the minimal surface to get started and really provide, I think, huge value. If we had just that and when I was in Clone and just be able to provide like libraries that we could build, then all the Python packages, that would be already huge. So I think that's for most projects really valuable to remove this, install through system these things, and then it doesn't work, and there's different versions and the whole dependency story.
Yep. All right. Guess last question, and then we call it a day.
Sure. Okay.
If you were the BDFL, or you could do anything you wanted, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think I would strip down Nix. I would rethink its design and strip down like the multi-users thing for sure. I don't have complete way of doing it. I just pinpoint that it's a huge problem. And really, I would just focus on the user experience side of things and go step by step. So I would probably focus in the beginning that to make development environments really, really seamless, together with binary caches and all of that. So just make that really, really reliable, 100% for everyone. And then when that's done, then continue on, other things.
Cool. Well, hopefully people get inspired and they decided to implement all of your ideas.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, people, listen. You should do what Domen says. So next week, Mick92 is coming on the stream. We'll be
Nice.
talking. So today we mentioned Nix built on cache, but he's been doing tons of projects. So I just want to talk to him as well. And
Nice.
then after that, I haven't really decided yet. I might go back to teaching a little bit, like talk about flakes, I think. And then we'll see. So yeah, everyone, thanks for listening. And that's a wrap.